You found the skeleton. How would you tell it's a dinosaur? You personally, how would you decide?
Well, interesting question. I don't know. I'd have to do some research on that.
Hey there, you two. The Dapper Dinosaur here. When last we left off, Pam Acker of the Colbean Center, a Roman Catholic young Earth creationist apostolate, was failing entirely to understand basic logic or the sedimentology surrounding upright tree fossils. Now she claims to have more fossils that only make sense in the flood model, or at least are compatible with it. Let's see how it goes.
And there are a few more fossils that fit that model.
The model she means is the flood model. It's fun because it's not actually a model, it's more of a conglomeration of various mutually incompatible and physics-defying post hoc assertions.
These clams are very interesting. Usually when a clam dies, it's because something has pulled it open and eaten it.
That is a way it can die, but it can also suffocate if it's covered in, say, a sediment slump, or it can die of disease, or presumably just of old age. Clams aren't immortal apart from predation.
Or if it dies, sort of natural causes, it will relax its adductor muscles. There's two muscles on the sides of the clam that pull those shells tight shut. It will relax its adductor muscles, and then something will come along and scavenge it.
But what if it's already buried in a sediment slump such that no animals can really get to it? Meaning that things like bacteria will simply eat the flesh in situ, leaving behind the biomineral shells.
Most of the time you see shells on the seashore, you see only half of a shell, or you see, there's very rare cases, a shell that's open, but it's still pretty empty.
Well, yeah, it's at the surface. If a clam was buried alive, you can't really see it at the surface. Conveniently, such a death will also mean that if the shell becomes a fossil, it will be in the closed position.
This is not a normal way for a clam to die, clamped tightly shut.
Unless there's sediment on either side of the shell, and fun fact, many clams actually spend most of their lives buried in the sediment in the first place. So if they die of some cause other than being eaten, their shell will stay shut unless they're exhumed between death and lithification of the sediment in which they died. Now, that will happen to most clams, which is why the world isn't just flooded with fossil clams, but it also won't happen to all of them, making closed clam fossils an unexpected part of the fossil record.
This had to have happened under very strange, dramatic circumstances.
No, not really. Sometimes an underwater dune collapses, or there's a bit of a sediment slump, which is like a landslide but underwater. That's neither extreme nor unusual.
And we find lots and lots of these clam fossils kind of all clustered together in a way that they wouldn't normally be just sort of in a heap, almost as if they had been washed there by lots of water.
Or by an underwater landslide of the kind that still happens to this day? Gee, what could possibly explain this other than a physically impossible flood used to commit genocide by an omnipotent god who doesn't actually need a flood to commit genocide, or really to commit genocide in the first place?
And if a clam were to experience the tumultuous events that happened at the beginning of the flood, it would probably clamp tightly shut in order to protect itself, and so we would end up with fossils like this.
Look, it's perfectly reasonable to think that a global flood could result in a large assemblage of fossilized closed clamshells. It's just that it's neither the only possibility nor the most parsimonious possibility, and the fact that it's utterly precluded by literal mountains of evidence, such as the Coral Mountain El Capitan in Texas, we know for a fact that it's not what caused such assemblages.
And this is the last fossil I'll show you that kind of fits the flood model better than a slow sedimentation model.
If it did fit the flood model better, it would not only be the last such fossil we're being shown, but the first such fossil. But also, I know about this fossil. It's literally the first thing that pops up when you just do a Google image search for fossil octopus. This is in fact Protoroctopus from the late Jurassic Voltseron Lagerstätte.
If sediment is laid down very slowly over time, soft-bodied creatures would not be preserved under normal circumstances.
That's true. And soft-bodied creatures are not preserved under normal circumstances. The deposition that preserved this fossil was highly unusual and is known in only 3 locations worldwide in all of geological history. Further, the depositional environment, according to the paper that described the site, Le Lagerstätte de Voltseron, Jurassique Moyen France, was one of slow deposition in calm water, or to quote the paper, La sédimentation était essentiellement marneuse et se guère au milieu des dépôts calmes sur une tranche d'eau importante. Ou, si vous préférez en anglais, the sedimentation was dominated by marl, suggesting a low-energy and deep-water depositional environment. It's almost like creationists are always exactly wrong about fossilization.
because they would rot very quickly, the bacteria would get to them, or something else would get to them, and there would be nothing left to fossilize.
In most cases, yes. Good thing that this was at the bottom of an anoxic and largely abiotic inland sea lagoon, where that isn't a problem.
But not only have we found entire fossilized cephalopods, we found entire fossilized soft-bodied creatures from...
I mean, yeah, there are some exceptional fossil sites out there, like this one.
A lot of different walks of life, and even things as tiny as embryos have been found fossilized.
Yes, famously the Dushantu Shale, another slow deposition, fine-grained fossil-bearing formation. Funny how it works that it's actually slow deposition that usually results in the best and rarest fossils rather than a catastrophic burial by flood.
So something extremely delicate and fragile. And
you mean the kind of thing that might be shredded apart in a violent flood, unlike a big, relatively sturdy vertebrate with bones and whatnot? Yes, I would love to hear more about how this is just the kind of thing best preserved in a flood.
In 2009, we even dug up a fossil that was so well preserved that the researchers could write with the ink.
I think it was this fossil, and that's not really as extraordinary as it sounds. Melanin is the dominant pigment in cephalopod ink, and it's a very robust molecule. And even when it's denatured, it still tends to have a dark color. So if there's a stain on the rock that's a dark color because of preserved melanin from the ink, and you scrape that off and mix it with some water, it will result in a dark paint or ink that can be used to write or paint with. But that's basically all paint or ink is. Some dark thing mixed into a fluid medium that allows the dark thing to adhere to surfaces like canvas or paper. So this is cool, but it's not exactly some great mystery of the universe.
In the squid.
Just a quick note, this isn't a squid. It's a basal member of Vampiropoda, the group of cephalopods that includes the octopus and the vampire squid, which is in fact not a real squid. Just thought I'd point that out.
So pretty excellent preservation there, which implies rapid burial.
Actually, as you can see in numerous papers about this fossil and the site where it was found, it requires the exact opposite. Rapid burial would be unlikely to preserve this much detail if it could even preserve the fossil at all.
So the fossil record actually doesn't fit very well with evolutionary theory. It looks more like something that would have been produced by some kind of cataclysm or catastrophe.
Except you know that that's absolutely precluded by 2/3 of Pam's own examples, which I have to say is a bit embarrassing for her. Or at least it should be.
The third icon I'm going to talk about is missing links.
I know most of you have been waiting for this, and for those of you who don't like it, sorry, but you're way outnumbered. And somewhat more importantly, you're completely absent from the people who actually pay me to make these. So, here it is. There was a trial in Kansas City in the 1990s, and I'm forgetting the name of it. You sure it was a trial in Kansas City in the 1990s and not nothing? Or possibly the Kansas evolution hearings in the mid-2000s? Those weren't a trial. They were, as the name implies, a series of hearings.
But it had to do with whether or not creation science could be taught in public schools.
Yep, specifically in the guise of intelligent design as fought for in those hearings by the Discovery Institute. Of course, the DI and its pack of conmen lost the hearings, and the Board of Education voted not to adopt new science standards that would have included intelligent design. Because, yet again, when evolution goes to court, it wins, and when creationism goes to court, it loses. It's almost like professional creationists are losers, but I wouldn't say that. It would be too mean, and I'm a nice dinosaur.
And the creation scientists lost.
as they always do.
And a very famous gentleman by the name of Ken Miller testified at this trial.
Indeed, Kenneth Raymond Miller is a well-known cell and molecular biologist at Brown University who is also an outspoken critic of creationism, specifically because it is indeed pseudoscience.
And I've seen video of the testimony. It's on YouTube.
I have not, nor do I really plan to. It sounds kind of boring to watch because real legal proceedings are mostly boring.
And he sort of presented, unveiled at some point. It was very showman-like.
You can't really tell, but I'm rolling my eyes internally.
This missing link sequence. He's like, well, you people over here who want to teach intelligent design, you're claiming that there are no missing links. Look, we have this wonderful sequence with all these missing links, and it's fabulous, and here it is.
Yep, and that's only a few of the transitional forms between basal artiodactyls and modern whales. There are dozens more.
And so this is yet another icon that you're presented with.
Ah yes, with Saint Basilosaurus, patron of paleontology and bringer of raw fish.
And the icon shows you this little tiger on speed up here.
I'm pretty sure that's not a tiger, but okay.
Becoming some sort of mole rat.
I'm pretty sure that's Pakicetus, which has in common with a mole rat more or less nothing besides being a mammal with 4 legs. Pam wouldn't be poisoning the well now, would she?
Which becomes some sort of almost hippopotamus-like thing, except it has a really long nose.
That looks like Ambulocetus, which is actually a bit hippo-like, and interestingly, the closest relatives of whales genetically are hippos. They're together in the clade Whippomorpha.
Which gets slightly more flipper-like things, eventually loses its legs, and becomes a whale.
Yeah, we should skip past Remingtonocetus, Protocetus, and Basilosaurus. They're not important.
And usually when I show this to kids, they're laughing at this point, so...
Kids pick up on tone of voice quite well and are very susceptible to well-poisoning rhetoric from people they trust. So Pam being able to efficiently lie to babies isn't really very surprising, but it is really gross.
This is the image that they're shown. This is the image that kids are shown. This is actually pulled from a website designed to teach kids about evolution.
Yes, we should definitely source materials for talks about science from websites for kids. That's why all my sources are Barney shows. Just look in the description.
So there are some problems with these missing links, and one of
Don't be
them,
afraid.
so I'm going to ask, there's some young people over here who may or may not be listening. Now they are.
Yes, miseducated kids are definitely who we should ask for insight into paleotaxa. This checks out.
Okay. Guys, I want you to give me a thumbs up or a thumbs down. Do you think the Pakicetus is the one on the top, or the Pakicetus is the one on the bottom?
It's both. The bottom one is from Nobu Tomuro, not as it says on the slide, Ron Weasley's dad from Harry Potter. The top one is correctly attributed. Both are speculative in terms of exact tail proportions and soft tissue placement and amounts, since none of that was preserved in the fossil record. Personally, I find the Carl Buell one to seem a bit more plausible based on the musculature of the head that more greatly resembles that of other ungulates, but that's just a me thing. I will say that the prominent scapula in the Carl Buell one does seem less likely than the relatively smooth torso of the Tomuro work.
And I'll go back to the previous slide and give you a little bit of a hint. The Pakicetus is the second one down.
Which looks greatly like the other two, especially when we take into account that all paleo art is somewhat speculative, because no fossil is perfectly preserved exactly as it was the moment the organism that created it died.
Okay? So you got that in your head? You ready for the next slide? They're looking at me like I'm crazy.
I mean, she kind of is. And yes, she's further poisoning the well with this obvious attempt to say that because life reconstructions of a single animal differ, then we can't know what we actually do know about the organisms. It's extremely dumb.
Okay. Is the Pakicetus up or down? I got a lot of ups. I got thumbs. Good. Yes. Okay. All right. Actually, the Pakicetus is both of them.
Quelle surprise.
What?
What's what? That was pretty obvious from the start of the whole exercise, especially since Pam went with the 4th and 8th returns when you Google search the image Pakicetus. It's not like she was reaching into some obscure corner of academia to bring these drawings up.
So both of these are artist renderings of Pakicetus.
That's true.
And this gives you a little bit of an inkling of the problem with artist renderings.
Artist renderings are not science. They're just there to help you visualize the organisms in question. No paleontologists are basing their papers on speculative soft tissue like hypothetical hair being raised at the hackles of Pakicetus. Since Pam likes icons so much, here's an icon of the entrance to Jerusalem. Do you think Pam thinks the sky was actually made of gold on that day?
And paleontologists joke that if they'd never seen an elephant and you gave them a skeleton of one, they would probably construct a Titanic hamster on it.
Yeah, but it's a joke for a reason. They actually wouldn't. The problem is that paleontologists know which bones are which, so they know where the eyes go, they know where the nasal openings are, etc. And muscle attachments are evident on skulls and other bones, so while they might not get the length of the trunk exactly right, nor the length of the amount of hair on a modern elephant exactly right, they certainly wouldn't make it a hamster. They'd make something that is recognizably elephantine, even though some of what was depicted would be speculative.
So, there's certain things about the bones and about where muscle insertion points go, and you can construct, you wouldn't construct a shark on this skeleton.
Oh, so she does know these things.
Okay, but that's worse. You do get how that's worse, right?
Right, but you can construct things that look different enough that all these young people rightly concluded they could be different species.
Welcome to paleontology, where the art isn't data, and the data that are data are incomplete. I hope you enjoy your stay.
But they are actually both Pakicetus.
And Pam needs to make an actual point.
If you look at the second guy down, he's also slightly different from those two representations. So we have 3 different representations of what this animal would have looked like.
Actually, it looks a whole lot like the top representation of Pakicetus, but drawn in a different style, and ultimately none of them actually look all that different. Even kids can look at different depictions of the same dinosaur with different speculative additions and still identify at least the more popular dinosaurs like Tyrannosaurus, Stegosaurus, or Triceratops.
And if I searched the internet, I could probably find a number more. The primary problem with the way that this is presented, besides the initial icon that we saw, which I'll point out some more problems with, is that you're given information that has not actually been ever discovered or identified when you look at these images.
No, you're given admitted, well-informed speculation. The actual science is based on the actual find, and that Pakicetus skeleton is amazingly complete. There aren't an abundance of ways to reasonably fill the missing bits, especially when you have things like the ankle bones that tell you exactly what kind of animal Pakicetus is, an archaeopteryx. That itself helps inform you how to construct the rest of the animal. Let's say you found a skeleton, and everything about it seemed to indicate that it was the skeleton of a human. It had a globular brain case, valgus knees, and even a very human-looking hand. But it's missing the front of the skull and the hips. Do you think it would be more reasonable to fill in the gaps with human morphology, or maybe, instead, you should give it the face of a dog and dinosaur hips? Technically you can't rule out the latter completely, but they are clearly so unlikely as to be reasonably dismissed unless we find positive evidence for them. Similarly, things like high neural arches on the anterior thoracic vertebrae on the reconstructed Pakicetus, which are some of the more speculative elements, are perfectly reasonable, because good luck finding a terrestrial archaeopteryx that has no such feature. They're even present to some degree on the semi-aquatic hippo. Further, when bones are found that were previously not known for the fossil taxa, we often find that they match very closely with previous reconstructions. An example is that when Lucy was found, we didn't have her feet, but based on the rest of her anatomy, we knew she was a biped, so she was generally reconstructed with human-like feet. Later, another Australopithecus was discovered, the Dakika child, and lo and behold, it had human-like feet, vindicating the well-informed speculation of paleoanthropologists.
And this is even true when you look at skeletons. So the actual skeleton of the Pakicetus that was uncovered, this is the most complete one I could find, is at the top, and the reconstructed skeleton that you will see in the museum is at the bottom.
Yes, and that reconstruction isn't just based on the most complete find of Pakicetus we have, but on all of them. Virtually no fossil vertebrates are known from complete skeletons, but each partial skeleton is likely to have material that is unknown in all the others, and that material is used to fill in the gaps in the knowledge of that taxon. In the case of that relatively complete Pakicetus we're being shown, it doesn't seem to have a femur, but if another far less complete Pakicetus skeleton does have a femur, then we can assume that that's the same femur morphology across the whole genus. So we use this composite approach to figure out the whole anatomy. And the more we do this, the less speculative reconstructions become, even though a full body or a full skeletal reconstruction will not match any single specimen exactly, and to make a life reconstruction we will always have to go beyond the current data.
Now, some museums are honest, and they'll fill in bones in a different color if those bones are not present and they're simply presumed, but this museum was not that honest.
That's not dishonesty. This information is widely available, and it's in no way hidden or lied about. These choices are between aesthetics and more easily transmitting information, which most of the public doesn't really care about. If you want to know if a skeleton on display is original, a fossil replica, a composite replica, or a composite of real fossil elements and reproductions, you can ask. In fact, please ask. I know firsthand that museum staff are usually pretty happy to talk about their displays, unless they have some pressing matter that needs to be taken care of.
Everything looks like it was dug up from the ground correctly like that.
I'm sorry, but if you think that someone dug up a complete 3D articulated skeleton that was in a life pose, then you're just too dumb to talk about paleontology. I don't even think kids think that's how this works.
And the skull particularly, I mean, we have fragments of it, but the three-dimensionality of it is maybe a little bit of a stretch.
No.
Skulls really only fit together in one way within any given group of animals. If you know that the skull bone you've got is a nasal bone, you know it's not going to the back of the brain case, and you know what bones it connects to. In an artiodactyl, that's the premaxilla, the maxilla, the lacrimal, etc. It's not going to connect to the occipital bone or the parietal bone. Additionally, all skull bones are mirrored, and so each bone you have tells you about two sides of the skull, which contains a lot of 3D information. Half is all you need when it comes to skulls. But also, I noticed that the picture of the hip and femur she is using is from Wikipedia, which cites the original paper describing Rhodocetus, that is, New Whale from the Eocene of Pakistan and the Origin of Cetacean Swimming by Philip D. Gingrich et al., published in Nature. It contains a full account of what was found, and it's a nearly complete skull. All but the interior two most cervical vertebrae, all the thoracic, lumbar, and sacral vertebrae, minus a few neural arches on the sacrum, and the foremost anterior caudal vertebrae. It also has a complete hip, femur, and about 30% of the sternum, and all the ribs, with only one being partially broken, with the distal end missing. So I guess when Pam says she couldn't find anything more complete than this, what she means is she just did a Google search for images and looked at what turned up, rather than, actually looking at the scientific literature. Why bother looking at actual science when you're wanting to overturn more or less all of it, right? Also, remember how I pointed out that since we know these animals are artiodactyls, we can infer some parts of their anatomy that might be missing, and I used the high neural arches at the anterior end of the thoracic vertebrae on the Pakicetus reconstruction? Well, Rhodocetus has those neural arches preserved, and they are indeed high as we'd expect in an artiodactyl. That's a confirmed prediction of evolution, what some might call the gold standard in science.
But Pakicetus is actually pretty good compared to some of the other skeletons. So this is Rhodocetus. This is the
I bring good news of great joy.
And this is the most complete skeleton of Rhodocetus I could find. It includes half of a skull, half of a pelvis, one leg bone, and a few vertebrae.
Too bad Google Images aren't the same thing as the literature, but also, like with the skull, half is all you need of a pelvis.
But note that the artist's rendering shows flippers and a tail.
We know based on both phylogenetic bracketing and isotope analysis that Rhodocetus was almost entirely aquatic. So the web flippers are quite reasonable, and we know it had a tail of some considerable length because we have caudal vertebrae incompatible with a short tail. And by their mere existence, they're incompatible with no tail. A lot of this confusion could be cleared up by just reading about Rhodocetus in the literature,
which we have zero evidence of. And in fact, this artist's rendering was retracted because eventually they had to admit that really there is no evidence that this thing had webbed feet.
First, I can't find any evidence of a drawing being retracted. That's not really how it works. You can't really retract a drawing. You can retract a paper it's published in, but I am unaware of that happening either. There was a Rhodocetus reconstruction early on that had a fluked tail, based on early speculation, but later it was found that this was not the case, and so no one reconstructs Rhodocetus that way anymore. Which is seen in her drawing. Near as I can tell, Rhodocetus is still routinely reconstructed with webbed feet, because that's kind of how quadrupedal aquatic mammals work.
And that was a complete surmise, and now based on some studies we've done on some of the leg bones and things like that, we think perhaps it didn't swim with webbed feet, and we apologize greatly. But in the meantime,
I can't seem to find that quote anywhere, nor can I find anything indicating that webbed feet have been disconfirmed. I think this is just Pam making shit up.
Who's heard that? Almost no one.
Unsurprising, given that near as I can tell, Pam just made it up for this talk.
Who's seen this? Lots of people, because this is all over the internet if you search for Rhodocetus. I had no problem finding it.
Indeed, the painting she used is the second image if you search for Rhodocetus on Google Images. And if you search for Rhodocetus skull, her skull pic comes up as the second result. And searching Rhodocetus skeleton yields her hip picture as the 12th result. She didn't really dig deep.
Another problem is that In that original transitional sequence we saw, everything had a lovely size progression, going from smaller to much larger. In the reality, between steps 3 and 4, so that would be Rhodocetus and Basilosaurus, you had an animal that was approximately 10 feet long somehow immediately give rise to an animal that's approximately 66 feet long.
Well, first, size is one of the most variable things about any animal lineage, so it doesn't really even require an explanation. But we have other fossil cetaceans that are less well known from postcranial elements, but which have increasing skull sizes, since the skull and bits of it are the most common fossil whale bones found, and examples include Pakicetus and Gravicetus, each bigger than the last, each bigger than Rhodocetus based on their skulls, and each smaller than Basilosaurus. So we do have intermediates for size anyway.
And I don't know about you, but that's a big baby.
Big placental mammals have big babies isn't really news.
Right?
Right, so let's do some actual math, which I know, horror of horrors. We'll use Pam's numbers, but we'll convert them to metric for ease of use. So according to Pam, Rhodocetus is 10 feet long, which converts to about 300 centimeters. It's really 304.8, but I'm going to keep it to 2 significant digits. That makes Basilosaurus 2,000 centimeters long. So the latest that Rhodocetus was around was about 50 million years ago. Basilosaurus was around about 35 million years ago, so we have 50 million years between them. Many dolphins reach sexual maturity between 5 and 10 years, but blue whales between 5 and 15. So we'll assume a 20-year generation time to be super generous. That means that if we assume that Rhodocetus or something like it evolved into Basilosaurus, that it would have taken about 270,000 generations. Now, since this is likely to have been an exponential function, we'll use the compound interest rate formula, since that calculates a geometric growth, and we can figure out the percent of change in size per generation. So we have a equals p times the sum of 1 plus r over n raised to the n power, where a is the final length, p is the initial length, r is the growth rate, and n is the number of generations. That's pretty simple. So it turns out that each generation of offspring would have to be on average 0.000026% bigger than their parents. To put that into perspective, imagine a human who is 5 feet 6 inches tall, or 168 centimeters tall, giving birth to a baby who, when it grows up, will be 5 feet 6 inches tall, or 168 centimeters tall, except, they're about a half a centimeter on average taller. That doesn't seem too extreme to me. In fact, I know a lot of humans who have given birth to babies that grew up to be much taller than that proportional to their parents. Now, let's remember that I'm using the absurdly long generation time of 20 years, which is far too long for any extant cetacean, and is far, far too long for Rhodocetus. We probably have more like 1 million to 1.5 billion generations. That lowers the growth rate to more like 0.00000019, or even as low as 0.000013%. This means that the same 168 centimeter person would give birth to someone who grew up to be 0.2 millimeters taller than they are. I can't imagine how Pam thinks this is some kind of problem.
And these are actually drawn to scale. The little Rhodocetus up there was stretched out to the 10 feet scale that's down there that belonging to the Basilosaurus.
What are the chances that she will do the math like I did? Let me know in the comments, but do it before you finish the video, so it's a real guess, not just you knowing the answer.
So this animal somehow gave rise to that animal, and not only is size a problem here,
I don't even have a clue how that's supposed to be a problem.
but it also lost its back legs.
Actually, no, it did not. Basilosaurus has back legs. You can see them in her illustration. They're right there. She's looking at them. The whole audience is looking at them. Why is she just lying to my face with the evidence of her lie on her own slide?
Its tail became approximately a third of its body.
Yeah, we couldn't have a single lineage with significant change in tail length as a proportion of the body length. I mean, it's not like creationists think that clouded leopards with their tails that come close to half their body length could be linked to, say, bobcats who barely have tails via common ancestry, right? Oh. Wait. No, that's exactly what they think. Darn.
And what's even more important is its nostrils went from the front of its nose to the top of its head.
Ooh, just more lies. In fact, the nares of Rhodocetus are intermediate, being high up on the head and pushed back from the tip of the snout, so that they sit about halfway between the eyes and the tip of the snout. Now let's check Basilosaurus. Oh darn, its nares are a bit farther back. But that's it. Damn, Who would have thought that Pan was just flying again?
In one evolutionary step, which is impossible.
I mean, yeah, no one thinks Rhodocetus popped out a baby Basilosaurus, so nice straw man she's got there. There are 15 million years to go from one to the other. Remember, even assuming the absurdly long 20-year generational time, that's still 750,000 generations, or 750,000 steps, which somewhat amusingly is also the factor by which young Earth creationists are wrong about the age of the Earth.
Again, it's like poetry, so if they rhyme.
So this is the sequence with no missing links.
If by that she means a sequence in which all animal species that existed that were transitional between modern cetaceans and basal artiodactyls are preserved and well known, then no, there is no such sequence. But if by that she simply means a sequence in which every major transition is represented by a transitional species demonstrating clearly the way in which cetaceans evolved, then yes it is. But also, remember this?
First of all, how many intermediaries would you like between something like a fox and a whale?
I don't know, 4? Fortunately, I've got organisms like Ichthyolestes, Ambulocetus, Remingtonocetus, Protocetus, Basilosaurus, and Dorudon, which is 6, and only a tiny but representative fraction of the fossil cetaceans we know of.
2? 22?
How about 50? As that's how many stem whale species I can find as having been described just checking Wikipedia. Of course, I know that a new one was described recently as of the time of this writing, Pakicetus colossus. So I guess 51 seems fine. It's certainly more than 21. Let's see if Dave goes full Dr. Banjo.
222 between a fox and a whale. The difference is so gigantic. 2,222? You want lots and lots and lots. Okay, I'm waiting for 41.
Well, we've got at least 51, so problem solved.
41? I think that's a small enough, reasonable number. Show me 41 different, spread out on the spectrum between a fox and a whale.
Okay, here we go. 1. Pakicetus inachus. 2. P. ataki. 3. P. calcis. 4. P. chitus. 5. Nalacetus ratimitus. 6. Ichthyolestes pinfoldi. 7. Ambulocetus natans. 8. Gondacacia potens. 9. Himalayacetus subathuensis. 10. Andrewsiphius sloani. 11. Autococetus precursor. 12. Delanestes ahmedi. 13. Cuchacetus minimus. 14. Remingtonocetus harudiensis. 15. R. domandiensis. 16. Aegicetus gehennae. 17. Babiacetus indicus. 18. B. misrahi. 19. Carolinacetus gingereci. 20. Georgiacetus vogtlensis. 21. Nachitochia jonesi. 22. Papiocetus lugardi. 23. Pontobacillus tuberculatus. 24. Macaracetus bidens. 25. Aegyptocetus tarfi. 26. Artiocetus clavis. 27. Chronatocetus rayi. 28. Datacetus hyeni. 29. Gravicetus razai. 30. Indocetus romani. 31. Myacetus ineus. 32. Perigocetus pacificus. 33. Kaiserocetus arifi. 34. Rhodocetus casrani. 35. R. balochistensis. 36. Basilosaurus setoides. 37. B. isis. 38. Basiloteris husseini. 39. Eocetus schweinfurthi. 40. Ancalocetus simonsi. And 41. Basilotritus uheni. Just for fun, here are some known protowhale genera I left out. Criocetus, Synthiocetus, Dorudon, Masrocetus, Ocucahea, Pontogenius, Sagacetus, Stromarius, Supiocetus, Zygorrhiza, Anteocetus, Pakicetus, Perucetus, Platypus, and Cacenodon. I think I've met the requirement. Yeah, she managed to skip a lot of animals and then just pretend that the ones she's cherry-picked are the only ones we know about. Once again, is she really this stupid, or is she lying?
There's some huge missing links here in between these two organisms.
Well, yeah, when you choose to leave out all but like 6 of the dozens of known taxa, you're going to get some that are missing.
Tremendous missing links.
People tell me, they say, Dapper, you have tremendous missing links. And you know, I think, well, no one has missing links like I do. In fact, I tell them, remember when in 2021 and President Obama tried to say that my missing links were pathetic, but you all told him to go back home? Exactly. We have tremendous missing links. Back in my day, you know what we would do if a link was found? We'd rough them up. That's right, we'd punch them. My links are the most missing.
Now, since this has been published, the original sequence that I pulled for you, which is actually still being taught.
I mean, why wouldn't it be taught? Nothing about it is incorrect or even implausible. At least, not on the basis of anything we've been told so far.
Many people want to replace Basilosaurus with Durodon, which is a smaller version of Basilosaurus, basically.
It's not, but okay. I say, why not just have both?
But, so that would help with the size problem?
Look, Pam might have a size problem. I don't know. I'm not interested in what she gets up to in the privacy of her own bedroom. But whales don't.
But it does not help at all with all the other problems I've just mentioned in terms of the legs and the tail, and particularly in terms of the nostrils and the way this animal is going to breathe.
But those aren't problems. They're just changes that happened in whales. Pointing out that evolution must have occurred for creatures to evolve isn't pointing out a problem for evolution. It's just stating a tautology.
Which I know is a tautology.
Because you can't just rewire your nasal passages.
I mean, you can, but also the difference in the nose is primarily just the length of the premaxilla bone. The longer it is, the further up on the face the nose is. If it extends so far that it's between the eyes, then of necessity the nares will be on top of the head. The nose of a whale is surrounded by the same bones as in a human skull, and it's in the same basic order. This is because evolution is contingent and can't go back to the drawing board, so to speak. Dolphins are modified tetrapods, and as such they have tetrapod skulls, which have been stretched into strange shapes, but are unmistakably made of the same basic bones in the same basic arrangement as in a human, a giraffe, a snake, a tyrannosaurus, or a frog.
Like that. It's a little more complicated.
That's a cool assertion she has there. It'd be a shame if someone pointed out that it has no supporting evidence.
So this is the new icon, one of the newer icons of whale evolution.
Is it a new icon, or is it just a different selection of representative fossil cetaceans?
But it's still got most of the same characters.
Because it's fundamentally explaining the same history of evolution in the same lineage with primarily the same facts. So yeah, we could combine the two versions and get an even fuller picture, although I suspect she might whine about different reconstructions, as if those were anything but illustrative.
And it still has lots of problems in terms of there are steps that are being made here between organisms that are incredible leaps.
Given how spectacularly she has failed at identifying such insurmountable leaps before, I'm going to have to lean pretty heavily onto that X button.
And also, just as a scientist,
Pam is not a scientist. She's someone with a science degree, but she does not do science. She does pseudoscience. If you publish science or are doing research with the intent to publish, then you're a scientist regardless of degree. If instead you go into a church, appropriate the Holocaust, and then lie about science, you're not a scientist regardless of degree.
I would like to know why there's only one kind of organism at every one of these branches when we have 70-something different kinds of whales and dolphins right now.
There are 3 reasons. 1, the chart needs to be able to fit representative animals with reconstructions without becoming visually confusing for a lay audience. 2, it's only a representative chart. As we've seen, we know far, far more taxa that could go onto the chart. And in actual scientific publications that present all the data, we are given far more organisms, but usually without nice drawings. And 3, not all species have been preserved as fossils, and of those that have been, we still haven't discovered all of them. So any cladogram with fossil species will be an incomplete picture of the reality of the past, even if it is exhaustive in terms of including all fossil taxa known at the time of its construction.
So how do we have this nice progression of one kind of thing gave rise to one kind of thing, gave rise to one kind of thing, and yet we have this incredible diversity now?
Because Pam doesn't know how to read a cladogram. Each step in her cladograms are actually branching, and as we mentioned, they're severely simplified for ease of comprehension. Here's an actual cladogram with fossil whales used in science. You see how many more branches there are? Yeah, that's where the science is being done. Sorry that these cladograms aren't particularly aesthetically pleasing or easy to parse at a glance, I guess.
It doesn't make sense. There are missing links for the missing links.
Here's a list of countries. The United States, the Republic of Ireland, Taiwan. Yes, I said it. The Chinese Communist Party can go suck a fat. The Vatican City State, the Republic of Lesotho, the Republic of Chile. Wow, how are there so many missing countries? Well, kind of because I didn't want to list every country that exists now or has ever existed. Does that mean that I have a problem for my geography? Of course not. I am aware of the other countries out there, like Monaco, Singapore, or San Marino. This is Pam literally just complaining that the charts she chose to focus on don't meet the arbitrary criteria she decided on. Pam should just choose different charts then.
And there are things that are related to the missing links that are missing.
I don't even know what that means.
And really, all that it proves that scientists took these organisms and put them together in a sequence.
Yeah, after carefully measuring and weighing their character states and performing complex statistical modeling such as neighbor joining, Bayesian inference, and fewest steps, testing the statistical support of each resultant tree, and then going on with the ones that are the most well supported as a working hypothesis, and we're able to do so with high confidence, which should not be possible if there is no common ancestry among these. Then, of course, from these consensus trees with dozens of organisms, some representatives of the major groups were selected to present both the temporal reality of the cetaceans as well as their morphological change over the time that they have existed. Scientists didn't just pull some bones out of a bucket and put them together in the order that seemed fun to them.
Oh, I forgot I had Archaeopteryx.
Happens to me all the time. I put Archaeopteryx in my pocket or something, and next thing you know, I'm looking for my Archaeopteryx on the table, in my bedroom, on my desk, everywhere but my damn pocket. And then when I finally check my pocket, I say, oh, I forgot I had Archaeopteryx.
I'll come back to him.
Hopefully soon. There's been too much mammal talk.
All that it proves that when you look at these images is that scientists can look at individual organisms and say, this one kind of has some similarities to that one, so I can line them up in a sequence. And I just, similarly prove to you that a Chihuahua evolved into a Bernese mountain dog.
Okay, is that height graph of dogs something that scientists did? Or is it something that Pam did? But also, imagine using dogs to deny that morphological change can result from selection and mutation. If anything, dogs are the poster child for morphological change over generations, to the point that they're absurdly morphologically diverse as a result of their evolution in a way that no other species has ever been observed to be, short perhaps of Brassica oleracea, which includes forms as diverse as cabbage, collard greens, kale, spinach, Brussels sprouts, kohlrabi, cauliflower, and broccoli. One of the plants in that list was a lie. Tell me which you think it was in the comments.
Okay. Now, yes, if you know anything about dogs, you know that that is not true.
Yeah, but it is true that we can arrange dogs into a cladogram and that dogs gain their morphological diversity from evolution, so this whole argument seems like an own goal.
A Chihuahua actually devolved from a regular dog. It's not really a dog anymore.
Seriously, what the f*** do creationists have against Chihuahuas? And also, what in the clockwork nirvana of Mechanis is a regular dog? Is a Great Dane a regular dog? What about an Indian pariah dog? What about a dingo? What about a Carolina dog? What about a Scotch collie? What about a Saluki?
I used to live in Texas, so I may or may not have an antipathy for the poor Chihuahua.
Maybe before she explains her antipathy for Chihuahuas, she should learn how to pronounce antipathy.
Really, I mean, when you're looking at these things that show sort of sequences or arrangements or whatever, we really don't have evidence that one thing gave rise to another. We just have evidence that one thing is similar to another.
If that were true, then we couldn't resolve high-confidence consensus cladograms and phylogenies. We can, so it's not true. If Pam thinks it is true, then she is welcome to show how everyone has been doing the math wrong for decades and why she's the first one to do it right. I look forward to her upcoming paper, although I won't be holding my breath for it.
And that could be because of evolution theory, if we had lots of other evidence to back it up.
Like embryology, homology, neutral variation, laboratory experiments, endogenous retroviruses, other fossil sequences, observed evolution in the wild, and full genome comparisons? Yeah, those would be handy to have. Too bad we don't have any of those things. Wait a minute.
But it could also be because varying within individual kinds. So we have dogs, there are lots of kinds of dogs, and then there are coyotes, and there are wolves, and there are foxes, and we would say that they're all dogs.
I would say they're all canines and restrict my use of the word dog to strictly Canis lupus familiaris, but that's only because I'm a science communication channel trying to inform people. I suppose if my job were to confuse gullible rubes in a Catholic mission, I might just start calling all sorts of things dogs. But of course, there's also no demonstrable reality behind the term kind.
Or dog-like. None of them are cat-like.
Interesting. Well, here's Hesperocyon and Proilurus, one of the earliest canids and felids, that is, members of the dog and cat families. Further, here's meiosis, which is basal to both. It's almost like when we go back in time, the differences between modern felids and modern canids shrink, and then become hard to distinguish. I wonder why that would be. Couldn't be evolution, though. Oh no, that wouldn't do.
None of them are giraffe-like.
Well, yeah, the ancestors of giraffes and canids diverged like 76 million years ago. That's in the dinosaur age. Why would anything that diverged that long ago, under the shadow of Tyrannosaurus, look much like each other today? Evolution is specifically about diversifying. That means that as you go forward in time, lineages diverge from each other both genetically and morphologically. So you would expect two lineages that split so long ago to not look much like each other.
But there's incredible variation within each individual kind.
Say it with me. What's a kind?
And it's not unreasonable to think, I mean, based on the natural selection we observe, that God could have created a dog that gave rise to all of the dogs.
You mean like Hesperocyon? The animal that kind of looks like a weasel, a cat, and a dog, even though technically it's just on the dog side of those splits? Weird then how he also made the very similar Proilurus and Meiosis, all of which look more similar to each other than some modern canids do, like the gray wolf and the short-eared dog of South America. It's almost like if you saw Meiosis, Proilurus, and Hesperocyon alive today, you'd think that they're in the same kind. Almost as if organisms look more similar to their evolutionary relatives as you go back in time. And there were no separately created kinds.
It is unreasonable to think that he created a dog that gave rise to a moose.
Well, I guess it's good then that no one thinks that.
Alright, so back to Archaeopteryx. This is
Tonight.
forward. It's supposed to be half dinosaur, half bird.
No. All birds are dinosaurs, and so is Archaeopteryx. This finch and this Triceratops are equally dinosaurs, in that they're both completely 100% fully dinosaurs. As a new group evolves, say birds, they don't shed their old identity, say dinosaur. They keep the old and add on the new. That's why humans are still monkeys.
It's been studied very closely by a gentleman by the name of Alan Fiducia, if I'm pronouncing his name correctly.
She is, but also, what a shock that Creationist's favorite paleoornithologist would come up. You know, the guy who thinks that Creationists are morons misusing his work, and who also has basically been laughed out of serious academic discussions for decades now.
And he's one of the world's leading ornithologists.
Maybe for decades that was true. Now he mostly publishes popular level books that no one reads except for actual scientists who only read them so that they can laugh about them. He's basically the Richard Carrier of ornithology, in that he really has no respect among actual experts, even though his work is occasionally patronizingly critiqued by them, and he has resorted to almost entirely appealing to an audience that does not have the first clue what he's talking about. Just like Richard Carrier. Sorry, John.
And he says there is no evidence to suggest that this animal was anything other than a bird.
Well, since birds are a group of dinosaurs, I'm not sure how that's helping, but also it doesn't have the classical anatomy of a bird, such as a picostyle, fused metatarsal bones, fused hand bones, the lack of teeth, a beak, a greatly enlarged premaxilla, a keeled sternum, etc. To call Archaeopteryx a bird is to redefine bird as it has been understood historically.
It has modern feathers that would allow it to fly.
That's true.
Too bad it doesn't have the wing musculature that would allow it to fly. At best, it was a good glider.
It has a lot of other features that are actually highly specialized, like the claws on its wing. That's a highly specialized variation of bird morphology that you see in swans and other birds like that.
Birds are dinosaurs. Dinosaurs have claws on their hands. That's all she just said there. There's no particularly specialized bird claw that is distinguishable from a dinosaur claw. It's basically the same thing.
And he says this is not a transition, it's simply a bird. So that was rather disappointing. So only half of this timeline is true.
Fun fact, Alan Fiducia isn't the king of taxonomy, and saying Archaeopteryx is a bird isn't actually the same thing as saying it's not a dinosaur. Even though he also says that. Okay, but after that she goes on to talk about dinosaurs on a separate icon. Let's save that for episode 3 of what looks like it's going to be a long series. I hope you liked the video, and if you did, please hit like and tell me what you enjoyed in the comments. If you didn't, then feel free to hit dislike, and likewise tell me what your problem was in the comments. I'll probably at least read them, if not respond to all of them. Either way, I hope you subscribe if you haven't already, and if you were already subscribed, or just subscribed now, click the bell icon and see if you have the notifications turned on so that you get notified when I have new content. Stay safe out there. I'm the Dapper Dinosaur. Hey, before you leave, I just want to take a second to thank my patrons and channel members, especially those pledging $20 or above. Benthoven, Philgevara, Tapioca Weasel, Whispers, Denny5252, Etheran Teller, Horseflesh, Ian Chan, Kelvin Brostek Van Manen, Landon Knoll, Mabbity Babbity, Monkey They Them, Robert Carpenter, Sphincter of Doom, Volus, Eta V, and Strawberry Vein. It's because of my channel members and patrons whom you're seeing on screen that this channel can stay afloat. Without you, it would all shut down. If you want to join the team, there's a link to join the channel below this video, and there's a link to join the Patreon in the description. On the Patreon, you can get a 10% discount for pledging annually, and either way, you get early access to virtually all of my scripted videos, often 3 to 5 months before they come out for the general public. Thanks for watching.